Oh, no, it's different, that's the packet.
Started with the meeting, of the community advisor for public safety. So now that, Cammy has joined us, we'll start with roll call, and introductions. My name is Jason McCallum. I'll be the acting chair in the room. Kimberly Brown Sparks is on Zoom, who's our current, chair. So with roll call, we'll go by voice. Todd?
Present.
Tyler?
Present.
Angela?
Here.
Jason? Here? Tammy?
Here.
And absent, Jenna, and do we have anyone else who's absent?
Nope, there's, your current membership is 6.
Okay, so there's that. Cool. So the next, I would move to strike a few things. So since we don't have a lot of time for discussion or people to elect a co-chair, I would move that we strike item 2, the election of a second co-chair, as well as under section 4, items A through C, because we don't have co-chairs, and unless somebody has a pressing thing to report on, we want to move to what the main business of today. And I also want to strike from item 5, item A, the budget requests, since again, that would have a fuller discussion. Any discussion on that?
They need a second before.
And
I second.
so we'll go around with a roll call. Tom?
Yes.
Tyler? Angela?
Yes.
Also yes. And Tammy?
Yes.
So those amendments pass unanimously. So in item 3, approval of agenda and approval of memoranda and minutes. So looking at the regular session minutes for February 28th, there's a move for a correction of the name, the name, was it corrected? Or does it still need to be corrected?
I don't think it has been corrected. We need to vote on to have it corrected in the minutes.
Okay, so before we approve the session minutes, there's a motion or I would like to entertain a motion to correct the name of the February 28th agenda item in minutes, caps letter in support of BPAC's ceasefire resolution.
Well, I mean, technically they were approved in the March meeting, so we're gonna correct them from 2 meetings ago. We're correcting the minutes 2 meetings ago.
Okay, so we're
You
making,
didn't approve those minutes yet, because last time you.
Oh,
didn't
that's right,
have
you
a
didn't
meeting,
form
so,
last month.
Yeah,
Okay. So no, sorry,
so that,
right,
that-
yeah, we are approving, yeah, we're gonna amend and then approve.
all right, so we need to make a motion for the amendment and then the approval?
so, yes, if you move to amend, what I did was because you had not yet approved those minutes, I put those changes in the minutes that you see in the packet. So,
So
because
it's
you hadn't
already
approved them at last meeting.
Okay, so we can just move to.
I motion to approve the minutes.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
I second. Okay, sorry, I didn't hear you.
You're okay, Kim. So we'll go around, roll call approval, Todd,
Yes.
Tyler, Angela.
Yes,
I say yes, Tammy,
Yes.
and with that, that is approved. There's also another, I'll entertain another motion to extend the meeting by 30 minutes to 6:30. In order to more fully discuss, what we have on this table. Does somebody want to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
I second.
So we'll go around the roll call vote. Todd?
Yes, I do need to leave at 6:30, but yes, that's fine.
All right. Tyler?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes. And I'll say yes. And Kimmy?
Yes.
Okay, so with that, we've extended the meeting to 6:30 and Todd, you're free to go when you should go. And so since we struck items A through B, or A through C, under 5, staff reports. So Ash, do you have any staff reports?
The only thing I wanted to report on was to let you all know that there was an additional resignation from Adrian that came in, and so that's why you now have a commission of only 6, quorum is 4, in person it's 3. Today is denim day, so I'm wearing denim for that, but those are the only things that I needed to let you all know with regard to the resignation.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so under other business, there's approval of public comment procedures for this meeting. Is that, should I read out?
Oh, yeah, actually, if you don't mind, I actually wanted to, wait, oh, okay, so we did skip the reports. Yeah, I just want to give one small report from the outreach committee.
Okay.
Would that be okay? Jenna, welcome. Yeah, it's concerning why we're striking public comment, so that's why. So, hi, yeah, I wanted to give a small report from the outreach committee. Oh, sorry, it's a report from member, not the outreach committee. It's on the CAPS letter of support for the ceasefire resolution. That resolution did pass 9-0 in the city council. The mayor has not yet decided whether to sign it. And we will be, I'll be giving you updates on that as it develops. The meeting, at least 2 city council meetings that I attended on that topic were Zoom bombed by people who made both Jewish and anti-Muslim slurs and hate speech. And I believe this is harmful to public discourse, and it's not fair to victimize people who identify with those groups to such hate speech in public meetings. To avoid this from occurring in CAPS meetings, the chair of the commission, Kamala, has already asked Ash to prepare a Google form, some kind of security where the commission can verify that online speakers are actually city residents. And a similar approach I heard is possibly being considered by the council as well. However, because this form was not able to be ready in time for this specific meeting, I would like to suggest that we move to cancel online comments for this meeting only, and hope in the future that we can allow online public comments again, whether with or without better security for it. Okay, sorry, that's all I had to report.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you for your report.
You're
Oh,
Jason,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to add that the mayor has pocket vetoed. I mean, her deadline for signing it has passed. So it's vetoed. Yeah.
Thank you for that
Appreciate
direct
it.
report.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
it has been pocket vetoed. It's been confirmed. Thanks, Isabel.
So we still need to make that approval of public comment procedures for this meeting.
Is there any discussion before making a motion on it? I guess I'll make the motion. Do I make the motion first and then we see if there's discussion?
If you wanna move to, I mean, it sounded like you wanted to move to, only permit in-person public comment. at this
Yeah,
time.
I'd like to move to only allow in-person public comments for this meeting tonight only.
Do you want to have a discussion before the vote?
Yeah, you can discuss it if you'd like.
Anyone wants to discuss it?
Okay. Based on what Najla's earlier report, I think it makes sense for the December procedures to be put into place. So we'll go around the room, voice vote for whether to make that amendment. Jenna?
Yes.
Okay. Todd?
Yeah,
Tyler,
Yeah.
Angela,
Yes.
I say yes, and Cammy,
Yes.
that motion passes. So public comment, welcome in the room.
And I want to mention, there's no one on Zoom right now, from the public, so.
But if somebody comes, we'll let them know.
Real quick, my apologies for arriving late. I want to introduce myself. My last class got out at 4:15, so I was trying to make my way over here. I'm Jenna Buckner. I'm a current undergraduate student at IU Bloomington. I'm studying political science with a minor in sociology. I am on CAPS as well as the outreach committee. So I just want to make that introduction real quick.
Thank you. All right, so we can move on to the new business. So there's the initial reading, the first item is the initial reading of CAP statement on the IRA's working definition of anti-Semitism.
Oh, I'll read it.
Okay.
Statement 24-01 on the IRA's working definition of anti-Semitism. Is that how you pronounce it? When you say IRA for
Yeah.
short? That's what I thought.
At least I
Thank
do.
you. Yeah. Background, the CAPS Commission was recently accused of anti-Semitism for asking the Common Council to take up and pass a resolution urging the US government to call for a lasting ceasefire in Gaza. The accusation was based on the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's, IRA's, working definition of anti-Semitism. This definition represents one pole of a debate among scholars of Jewish studies about how to recognize anti-Semitism. The IRA definition has been criticized by a variety of human and legal rights groups for listing several examples of anti-Semitism that regards speech made toward Israel, including holding what it calls double standards against Israel. Quote, applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded by of any other democratic nation, unquote. For implying that calls for changing US policy toward Israel may be anti-Semitic unless they also include a long list of condemnations of other states and non-state actors. The IRA definition and its double standards example has been criticized by scholars and legal experts as confusing the public about anti-Semitism and threatening the rights of US citizens to exercise constitutionally protected speech against government policies. In its April 24th meeting, CAPS seeks to thoroughly investigate this accusation, promote civic discourse on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, and explore how it might affect safety and marginalized people in our community. On bigotry and anti-Semitism, the CAPS Commission detests and condemns bigotry and hate speech among marginalized peoples, including Jewish people, and actively works to promote policies, programs, and civic discourse that will improve the safety of all marginalized community members. For this reason, CAPS views any accusation of bigotry or hate speech against its work as warranting investigation. Anti-Semitism is a real and legitimate threat in our community. In March 2022, CAPS passed Resolution 22-01, condemning anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence, which documents several acts of anti-Semitism, including acts of violence, bigotry, and intimidation that have occurred in Bloomington in recent memory. That resolution, quote, condemns anti-Semitism and acts of anti-Jewish bigotry as morally reprehensible in themselves, as well as serious threats to public safety. And it denounces the anti-Semitic sentiments that give rise to such acts as false, hateful, and antithetical to core American values. Accusation against ceasefire resolution. When CAPS passed a letter in February 2024, asking the council to pass a resolution supporting a ceasefire in Gaza, it was carrying out its mission of advocating for policy changes to improve the safety of all Bloomington residents and visitors by amplifying the voices of the marginalized. The subsequent accusation of anti-Semitism against the ceasefire resolution, based in the double standards example of the IRA, implicates not only CAPS, but also 2,000 city residents who signed the resolution's online petition. The accusation especially implicates the local community members who wrote the original resolution draft and submitted it to the CAPS Commission and the council, many of whom are Jewish or members of other marginalized groups. Furthermore, the accusation even implies that the council is anti-Semitic for voting for the final draft of the resolution. Threat to free speech. Such assertions conflating political speech with hate speech are not isolated to Bloomington or to this topic. However, if such assertions of bigotry are not firmly rejected by bodies such as the CAPS Commission, these statements may suppress the voices of Bloomington residents on important policies related to safety. The IRA definition has often been used to wrongly label criticism of Israel as anti-Semitic and thus chill and sometimes suppress nonviolent protest, activism, and speech critical of Israel and/or Zionism, including in the US and Europe. This explanation, urging the United Nations to reject the IRA definition, was included in a letter written and signed by over 100 Israeli and European human rights agencies in April 2023. In encouraging greater use of the IRA definition against its critics, the Israeli government recently recommended that the battle against anti-Semitism should shift from the defensive to the offensive by utilizing the definition and its 3 Ds of anti-Semitism. As Yusuf Munayer, a senior fellow at Arab Center, Washington, D.C., said in The Intercept, this shift recognizes that defending Israeli policies is not working, since more and more people are recognizing the horrific treatment of Palestinians for the fundamental injustice that it is. Instead of defending these policies, the strategy calls for attacking critics of them. 2 responses to the IRA definition. 2 other definitions of anti-Semitism have been created in response to the IRA definition. As James H. Rudy, professor of political science at Indiana University, Jeffrey C. Isaac, told the Indiana State Senate in February 2024, quote, the IRA definition is not as universal as some have said. It has been challenged by hundreds of scholars of anti-Semitism, the Holocaust, and Israel, mainly Jewish scholars. In 2 very well-known documents, the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism and the Nexus document on anti-Semitism, unquote. In fact, the JDA and Nexus document explicitly reject the IRA's double standards example. Rejection of accusation of anti-Semitism. Oh, I skipped a whole page, sorry. Citing international, it got a lot longer. Citing international law, the JDA states, quote, political speech does not have to be measured proportional, tempered, or reasonable to be protected under Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights or Article 10 of the European Convention on Human Rights and other human rights instruments. Criticism that some may see as excessive or contentious or as reflecting a double standard is not in and of itself anti-Semitic. The Nexus document says there are numerous reasons why such speech may not be anti-Semitic, paying disproportionate attention to Israel and treating Israel differently than other countries is not prima facie proof of anti-Semitism. There are numerous reasons for devoting special attention to Israel and treating Israel differently. For example, some people care about Israel more. Others may pay more attention because Israel has a special relationship with the United States and receives $4 billion in American aid, unquote. Do you want to read some of it?
I can take it. So threat to Jewish people. Moreover, the confusion created by the IRA definition could make it harder for Americans to recognize legitimate instances of anti-Semitism. As Daniel A. Siegel, coordinating committee member of Jewish Voice for Peace, Indiana, wrote in the Indianapolis Star in January 2024, urging the state of Indiana not to incorporate the IRA definition into law. Doing so would, quote, undermine this struggle against anti-Semitism and thus make me and other Jews less safe in Indiana. Siegel further remarked that the bill tramples, quote, tramples our First Amendment rights as Americans, precisely as the ACLU of Indiana has recognized, while sowing confusion about anti-Semitism, end quote. Additionally, the National ACLU recently wrote a February 2024 letter urging the US Department of Education to reject the IRA definition because it, quote, conflates protected political speech with unprotected discrimination, and enshrining it into regulation will chill the exercise of First Amendment rights and risk undermining the agency's legitimate and important efforts to combat discrimination, end quote. Threat to Palestine and Muslim people. Besides threatening the free speech rights of all Americans and threatening the safety of Jewish people by causing confusion about anti-Semitism, the IRA definition has also been used to violate the rights of Palestinians and Muslims. Two legal and political rights groups in the US, Palestine Legal and JVP Action, oppose the IRA because, quote, many of the most vocal proponents of the definition openly support its use as a censorship tool, and the definition is most often wielded to silence Palestinian human rights advocates, especially Palestinian and Muslim academics and students, who are frequently and falsely smeared as anti-Semitic solely for their speech in support of Palestinian rights. Rejection of accusation of anti-Semitism. CAPS recently released an alternative public safety report entitled Safety for All at the Expense of None, which was named to help the community navigate situations when the safety of one group of people is presented as an obstacle to the safety of another group. The commission rejects the assertion that human safety is zero-sum. By asking the US government to allow humanitarian aid to enter safely into Gaza and to take the first necessary step toward a lasting peace, the ceasefire resolution improves the safety of the residents of Gaza, Israel, and Bloomington. The commission rejects this accusation and opposes the IRA definition as one, endangering the First Amendment rights of all people in Bloomington, including Palestinian, Jewish, and Muslim people, to speak on matters related to public safety. Two, it's a potential threat to the safety of the Jewish community by making it more difficult to recognize true anti-Semitism. Furthermore, CAPS urges the city and all community members to oppose the IRA working definition of anti-Semitism and any other definition of hate speech that sows confusion or threatens the right of marginalized people to speak freely on matters related to safety.
So to help the commission, to assist the commission discussing and voting on this, to be fully informed, we have invited 3 guest speakers who are scholarly experts. And yeah, let me go ahead and start the intro. Yeah, CAPS takes any claims that it is engaging in hate speech very seriously. Upon investigating this claim, I and co-sponsoring members of the statement, Commissioners McCulloch and Brown Sparks, learned that scholarly experts and rights groups, including many Jewish scholars and rights groups, have asserted that the IRA definition has been used across the US and Europe to discourage or stifle protected political speech about government policies. Because the ceasefire resolution was brought to CAPS by members of the public who belong to marginalized groups, especially Jewish and Muslim residents, we discussed and agreed that we are ethically obligated to investigate the IRA definition more fully and explore how accusations of anti-Semitism based on this definition might be used to chill speech made by marginalized residents in our community about human safety. With this statement and today's meeting, we hope to improve the public discourse in the Bloomington community around hate speech, anti-Semitism, and the US government's policies toward Israel, Gaza, and other occupied Palestinian territories. We began working on the statement a few weeks ago when we learned about the accusation made against the resolution and the commission. However, this week's recent wave of university students and faculty across the US being falsely labeled as anti-Semitic, and with some being subsequently criminalized, suspended, and or arrested for staging peaceful protests against their university's policies toward Israel, confirms our belief that informing the community and elevating the discourse around anti-Semitism will contribute towards creating a safer community for all residents of Bloomington. To enlighten our discussion today, we're honored to be joined by 3 local scholarly experts with diverse backgrounds and views on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Aziza Kazum, Abdulkader Sino, and Daniel Siegel will be joining us online in a few minutes. CAPS has also invited a 4th local scholarly expert who has previously defended the IRA definition to the commission to speak on its behalf in our meeting today, but however, they declined the invitation to attend.
So anti-Semitism is a very real and legitimate threat in the US and in the Bloomington community. The CAPS Commission passed that resolution condemning anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence 2 years ago that documents several acts of anti-Semitism that have occurred in the city. CAPS is also aware that many statements of neo-Nazi anti-Semitic hate speech occurred in the city council meeting where the ceasefire resolution was deliberated. We want to make it clear that the anti-Semitic comments were all uttered by online attendees who were very likely not residents of Bloomington or even of Indiana. While CAPS recognizes that we as a commission open ourselves up to possible criticisms of hypocrisy by not allowing online comments on a discussion about protecting local rights to free speech, the CAPS Commission views the spectacle of hate speech that occurred in those meetings to be a distraction from the topic of our city's support for a lasting ceasefire in Gaza that calls for an end to the genocide, which would allow essential humanitarian aid to be brought to the civilians there. Due to the high likelihood that this meeting could also be threatened by such a hateful spectacle of neo-Nazi speech, emanating from a national trend of Zoom bombing city council meetings around topics related to diversity and equity, we have decided not to allow public comments during today's CAPS meeting. Online public comments. We want to stress that this is a temporary emergency measure taken due to the inability of our city to prepare adequate security measures for the time being to ensure that only local residents with verified identities can be allowed to make online public comments. We are aware that the council is also researching similar security measures for their public comments to allow them to be open to people with disabilities, transportation limitations, or other limitations that prevent them from attending public meetings in person. We hope to have a functioning security system in place for allowing online public comments again before our next CAPS meeting. And we look forward to seeing what the city council decides to do for its future meetings.
Oh, you're muted, Tammy.
CAP's founding ordinance states that we should attempt to amplify the voices of marginalized in our community in ways that improve safety for all residents. Fostering responsible and well-informed discussions on what constitutes hate speech is an important part of improving the safety for our community. For this reason, myself and 2 other CAPS members who are in coordination with many community members who are important stakeholders on this topic, have drafted a statement on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism for the commission to discuss and vote on after hearing from our invited guests and members of the community. We are devoting the rest of today's meeting to investigate this very serious accusation made against the commission and to take the time to learn more about the definition used in the accusations made against the commission from local guests and community members. We believe that the best antidote for confusion and contention around what constitutes hate speech is not to shut down all civic discussion of these important topics, but to invite a civil and open discussion to take place in a forum where CAPS members and the community can learn more about them in a healthy environment.
All right, and so now we can move to our speakers. So first, I'll introduce Aziza Kazoum, who obtained her PA from Wellesley College and her PhD from UC Berkeley. She is an associate professor of Middle Eastern languages and cultures at Indiana University Bloomington and core faculty in Jewish Studies and the Center for the Study of the Middle East. Before coming to IU, she was at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, UCLA, and the Tel Aviv University. Her previous research asked how Orientalism and the East-West dichotomy shape Israeli Jewish identity and racial ethnic hierarchies in Israel. In her current research, she is convening Muslim and Jewish focus groups. She's asking participants about their experience at the Gaza war, when they feel empowered to speak and when silenced, and how they define Islamophobia and anti-Semitism.
Is it all right if I sit in the center so I can see everyone?
Sure.
Sure. Yes. Great. And then, Georgie, do we have copies of Jerusalem and Ireland?
Oh, yeah, they are in the packet, I believe. Are the copies of the definitions in the packet? Yes, yeah, okay.
Okay, so thank you for inviting me. As was said, my research is on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia together. But today I'm addressing a smaller question. How do Jews specifically define anti-Semitism specifically? And the answer is that Jews are in the midst of a debate. And the debate is crystallized into these two documents that you have, the Jerusalem definition and IRA. Jerusalem is the Jerusalem Declaration on Anti-Semitism, and IRA is the working definition of anti-Semitism from the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And so I've set my task as taking you through these two approaches. I'm going to reference the ceasefire resolution and the letter about it relatively little. I think this question of anti-Semitism has come up before and is likely going to come up again. And I think I can be most helpful by giving you a general sense of how Jews think through these questions. That enables you to talk to people you represent with some extra perspective. So I've got big slides here, and I'm not going to give you enough time to read them, but you have them printed out, and you also have my email up there, and anybody who has any questions or wants anything can email. So to go to the next slide. The first point is that IRA and Jerusalem agree on a lot of things. For both Jerusalem and IRA, speech is anti-Semitic when it references symbols, images, and negative stereotypes of classic anti-Semitism. So examples are linking Jews to forces of evil, references to a world Jewish conspiracy, or Jews controlling the media or economy or government, or portraying Jews as having a hidden power that they use to advance their own agenda at the expense of other people. And for both documents, it's anti-Semitic to describe the Jewish state using these stereotypes and tropes. So definitions of Islamophobia also include a list of stereotypes and tropes. And this centrality of stereotypes gives you one clue as to why it can be very difficult to have conversations about Israel. So Palestinians are under the control of a Jewish state. This is not controversial to say, right? There's a state, it calls itself the Jewish state. It has Palestinians, both citizens and non, who are required to abide by its policies and rules. Palestinians argue that this state oppresses them as non-Jews. They want to protest this Jewish advantage, this Jewish power, and they want to protest US support for it. It can be complicated to do that without touching on stereotypes of international Jewish power. Right, so there's some real diciness in talking about Israel. There's a real sort of butting up against anti-Semitic and Islamophobic stereotypes. Here's a similar point. One of the central anti-Semitic stereotypes or tropes is the blood libel. Technically, this is the assertion that Jews kill kill Christian children and use their blood, I think right around now, I think for Passover, in rituals. But in the interviews I'm doing, I've heard Jews extended to mean any baseless portrayal of Jews and murderous or bloodthirsty. Again, for some, the complaints uncomfortably echo the stereotypes. Palestinians and their allies want to say that Israel is indiscriminately killing Gazans. Some Jews hear, in the specific language used, a blood libel, right? A reference to Jews as murderous and bloodthirsty. Okay, so on the next slide is a full list of where Jerusalem and IRA agree. Both IRA and Jerusalem reference denying or minimizing the Holocaust. Holocaust denial is about dismissing Jewish suffering, and in my interviews, Jews are generalizing to any kind of callousness toward Jewish suffering. Callousness can also measure Islamophobia, and this is a major issue in talking about October 7th and the Gaza war. Jerusalem adds what are often called dog whistles or coded statements. So the Rothschilds control the world as code for the alleged power of the Jews. Both documents consider it anti-Semitic to hold Jews collectively responsible for what Israel does, or to treat Jews just because they're Jewish as agents of Israel. Both argue that it's anti-Semitic to accuse Jews of being responsible for something that a single Jew or a Jewish subgroup did. Charges of dual loyalty, that Jews are by definition more loyal to Israel than their own nations, are considered anti-Semitic. And then these last points technically exist only in one document, but I think based on the larger literature, it's possible to argue that both approaches agree. Essentialism is the practice of treating character traits as describing all members of a group and as inherent to the group, often considering those traits to be biologically passed down or even culturally passed down across the generations. Calling for, aiding, or justifying the killing or harming of Jews. This is the question that Elise Stefanik used to grill the presidents of Harvard, UPenn, and MIT. Okay, so if you look at this list, does the ceasefire resolution come out as anti-Semitic? I could imagine some arguments, but I think that the correct answer is for those Jews who do see the resolution as anti-Semitic. The issue is not the content, but rather the context. So context is my next topic. Waxman, Schraub, and Hussein have argued that because of context, two people can say precisely the same words, but in one case it's anti-Semitic, and in another case it's not. An example is the person who has said anti-Semitic things their entire life, has never been interested in any kind of international causes, and then suddenly discovers the Israel issue and starts posting about Israel. Their critique of Israel would be understood to be anti-Semitic. Critiquing Israel is the cover, the direction of the anti-Semitism. To apply that to the ceasefire resolution, the concern would be not the resolution itself, but the larger project in which it's embedded. The double standard that was mentioned in Babek's critique of the ceasefire resolution is another example of context. The double standard refers to cases where people judge Israel by a different set of criteria than other countries. or cases in which people become hyper-focused on Israel. In this argument, passing a resolution about Israel is not anti-Semitic because of the content, but because of all the other resolutions that have not been passed before. The context is also where Jerusalem and IRA diverge from each other, because Jerusalem uses the concept of context to articulate when critique of Israel is not anti-Semitic. So on the next slide, there we go. Context can include the intention behind an utterance, or a pattern of speech over time, or even the identity of the speaker, especially when the subject is Israel or Zionism. So for example, hostility to Israel could be an expression of anti-Semitic animus, or it could be a reaction to a human rights violation, or it could be the emotion that a Palestinian person feels on account of their experiences at the hands of the state. So in this thinking, Palestinians have multiple non-anti-Semitic reasons for critiquing Israel, or critiquing Israel over other states, because they are subject to Israel's policies. Jerusalem often uses the term in and of itself, as in, it's not anti-Semitic in and of itself to compare Israel with other historical cases, including settler colonialism or apartheid, or to boycott Israel. Okay, so on Israel, I have 2 slides for you. First, talk about Israel and Palestine that both IRA and Jerusalem consider to be anti-Semitic. So like I said earlier, both documents consider it anti-Semitic to use classic anti-Semitic tropes to describe Israel, or to conflate Israel to conflate Jews with the Israel the state, or to apply double standards. Both have an argument that Jews have the right to be in that land and to flourish as Jews, but here agreement and disagreement is more complicated. IRA considers it anti-Semitic to delegitimize Israel as a Jewish state, or to make any argument that Jews don't have a right to self-determination when other people do. Jerusalem is a bit more cryptic. It says it's anti-Semitic to deny the right of Jews in the state of Israel to exist and flourish collectively and individually as Jews in accordance with the principle of equality. What does that principle of equality mean? In section C12, Jerusalem opens up the conversation for, quote, a variety of constitutional arrangements for Jews and Palestinians. And that is part of what distinguishes it from IRA's approach. And then my second slide is how both describe critique of Israel that's not anti-Semitic. I needed more space for Jerusalem than IRA there. Proponents of IRA are a diverse bunch, as is everyone, but in general, they tend to say that it's by definition anti-Semitic to support the boycott, or to call Israel an apartheid state, or to call Zionism racism, or to reference the term river to sea. Jerusalem is more circumspect, arguing again that these statements can be anti-Semitic, but are not necessarily. So then 2 more points before I wrap up. There's one other central difference between IRA and Jerusalem. Jerusalem acknowledges that anti-Semitism has some unique features, but overall, it sees anti-Semitism as comparable to Islamophobia and white supremacy. For Jerusalem, these are all variations of the thing called racism. IRA and its proponents tend to see anti-Semitism as relatively more independent from other hatreds, possibly even unique. So why do we care about this? Uniqueness matters because it affects how alone Jews are understood to be, or how alone they experience themselves. A sense of aloneness, of being routinely victimized by absolutely everybody, affects one's reactions to things like October 7th. It affects the degree to which an all-out military response seems called for. It also affects the degree to which Jews can expect to align themselves with other marginalized groups or consider their fight and Muslims' fight to overlap. And that's my second point. When we talk about Israel, we usually talk about Muslims and Jews as enemies. But some work suggests that Jews and Muslims are actually fighting the same fight. Historically, European Christians used a divide and rule strategy with Jews and Muslims, in which they sometimes use Muslims as the foil to demonstrate how debased and rotten Jews are, and sometimes the flip side. Some scholars, including Louis Deckel, who's a colleague of mine at Jewish Studies here, argue that Europeans are still using divide and conquer strategies. This time what they're doing is manipulating notions of Muslim anti-Semitism to deflect Jews' attention from how serious anti-Semitism remains in European circles and how little progress has been made since the Holocaust. So notice that I just described a European history of divide and rule. The anti-Semitism literature and Ira and Jerusalem are based in the experience of European Jews. They create a model of anti-Semitism based on how it unfolded in Christian-dominated Europe, and then they apply that model to other societies. Jews also lived in Muslim-dominated societies, and scholars are debating whether the experience of Jews there are similar enough that we can actually use the same definitional strategies to understand either history in Muslim countries or the present day. The problem is that in Muslim societies, Jews were oppressed. But the Holocaust, the Crusades, the expulsion from Spain, the regular assaults on shtetls, all those things that define anti-Semitism for us happened in Christian Europe. And Muslim-Christian differences in treatment of the Jews were not just about how much violence Jews experienced, but also how Jewish-Muslim relations were organized in potentially fundamentally different ways. This would all suggest that it's inaccurate to define anti-Semitism by generalizing from European Jewish experiences. But even that's complicated. This is an older history I'm talking about. Ideas do move across borders. And even if the history is different, maybe Muslims are now anti-Semitic at similar rates and in similar ways as Christians. This is the question that scholars are hashing out now. But this matters when we talk about Muslim resistance to the state of Israel. To the degree that Muslim histories are similar to Christian ones, an anti-Semitism frame based on European experiences makes sense. To the degree that Muslim treatment of Jews can't be subsumed into the general model based on European experiences, we need to recalibrate. Okay, so let me sum up a little bit. You represent the residents of Bloomington, which includes not only Israeli Jews and their allies, but also Palestinians and their allies. And I've spoken in the name of Jews only. In Ira and Jerusalem, and in the much larger literature that stands behind it, Jews have articulated the multiple and complex criteria they use to think through what is and isn't anti-Semitism. For the ceasefire resolution hand, the primary questions are who is speaking and what their larger goal is. That is, those are the primary questions that Ira and Jerusalem have asked. The larger context of this resolution is a series of accusations and frameworks that IRA proponents read as anti-Semitic all the time, and therefore feel threatened and betrayed by this resolution. But Jerusalem proponents read as not necessarily anti-Semitic, especially if they're coming from Palestinians or those who are directly affected by Israeli policies. And I haven't gotten to a complicated question of whether anyone can determine what is anti-Semitic or only Jews can determine what is anti-Semitic. But even if you allow only Jews to make the determination, you still have this internal disagreement to think anyway. And with that in mind, I guess the only thing I can say is good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And we will be having a period for questions, both from commission members and audience members later. So we'll hear from our three speakers first. Okay, so going next is Daniel A. Siegel. Daniel is the Jean M. Pitzer Professor Emeritus of Anthropology and Professor Emeritus of History of the Claremont Colleges. He has also served on the Executive Board of California Scholars for Academic Freedom, a past fellow of the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, and a past secretary of the American Anthropological Association. He has published widely about racial discourse and practices in Trinidad, the history of history, and several social science disciplines and world history. He is proud to serve on the coordinating committee of Jewish Voice for Peace Indiana and the organizing collective of U.S. Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel. For his pro-Palestinian activism, Daniel has earned the distinction of his own dedicated entry on the pro-Israeli academic doxing website, Canary Mission, which details a long list of his accomplishments in advocating for peace in Israel and Palestine, including former statements he has written opposing the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, leading a BDS campaign at Pitzer College, as well as a long list of protected political speech he has made against Israeli policies toward Palestinians.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Just about 1 year ago, I was in the West Bank, and some dear Palestinian friends invited me to share dinner with their family. And as their children played around us, the parents discussed with me how they explained to their young children their lives without freedom, something the children experience regularly, since movement in the West Bank for Palestinian requires going through highly militarized checkpoints. One of the children was particularly averse to moving beyond their small neighborhood because several years earlier, he'd gone through a checkpoint with his uncle, and the Israeli occupying soldier had pointed and aimed an assault weapon at his uncle's face. The mother explained to me that when they explained to their children why they live without freedom and why they live as social and legal inferiors to Jewish Israelis, the mother explains that it's because of the Zionists, because of the colonists, the settler colonialists. At no point has the mother talked to me about the lessons they give their children about their lack of freedom did she ever use the word Jew or Judaism. She understood her lack of freedom as a result of settler colonialism, and she used the term Zionist for the specific name of settler colonialism that established the settler colonial apartheid ethnic cleansing state of Israel at the expense of Palestinians, at the expense of their lives and rights. What the IRA definition does is it says that when these dear friends of mine, or if I myself say Zionism and the Israeli state are guilty of these crimes, that it then says, aha, that's anti-Semitic because you're criticizing a state that claims for itself the identity of Jewish. In fact, we should recognize that there's nothing Jewish about settler colonialism. There's nothing Jewish about apartheid. There's nothing Jewish about ethnic cleansing. There's nothing Jewish about genocide. All of these things aren't Jewish, they're Jewish supremacist. The lie that opposing Zionism, opposing the Israeli state, is somehow anti-Jewish rather than anti-colonial is a lie that shuts down the very possibility of Palestinians asking, demanding from us what all human beings should have: freedom and equality. Freedom and equality. IRA exists not the least bit to define anti-Semitism, but to weaponize it, to use it to shut down an entirely legitimate, ethically urgent struggle to end the settler colonialism that oppresses Palestinians. There is zero reason to suspect Palestinians of any dislike of Jews or Judaism because they object to Israel. They object to Israel because Israel oppresses them. There's nothing anti-Semitic about that. Calling it anti-Semitic is to attempt to stifle their pursuit of freedom. That is, in fact, anti-Palestinian hate. The IRA definition and its attempt to use it, as in the false attack on CAPS, is in fact hate speech. The IRA definition and the attempts to use it to shut down the Palestinian struggle for freedom and equality, that is hate speech. As a Jew, I thoroughly reject this. It also makes me less safe as a Jew because it creates a misunderstanding and confusion about anti-Semitism, and thus makes the struggle against real anti-Semitism, as when the right wing in this country, the Trumpists in this country, the MAGIsts in this country, march through Charlottesville and say, Jews will not replace us. In fact, what Zionism has done is it has placed a concern to support Israel as a settler colonial state and to call criticisms of Israel anti-Semitism. They're not the least bit interested in protecting Jews. They're entirely interested in protecting a state that denies Palestinian freedoms. How dangerous is that, to put fealty to an oppressive state ahead of concerns for Jewish safety? How dangerous is that? And that is the loyalty that Zionists demand from us, which is loyalty to an oppressive state. And it is hate against Palestinians, and it makes Jews less safe in the face of real anti-Semitism. The Bloomington Common Council begins each meeting with a beautifully written and inspiring and ethically urgent land acknowledgement. Effectively, that is an acknowledgement that the United States is a settler colonial state and that we have extraordinary unfinished business. We can't reverse history. Those of us who've inherited wealth and privilege because of settler colonialism of North America, we can't go back on a boat and live somewhere else. We cannot reverse history, but we should repair history. And repairing history means not expelling all the white people from North America, but it does mean reparations and land backs and taking obscene accumulations of private wealth and making this into social goods. The settler colonialism that is the basis of the United States, mostly, it continues, but it is largely a process completed in the 1800s. The difference between the settler colonialism of the Zionist state and the United States is the settler colonialism of the Zionist state at the expense of Palestinian rights and lives and freedom and equality is unfolding in real time right now. It is a thoroughly illegitimate, unethical process, the Zionist process of establishing a settler colonial state at the expense of Palestinians. It's indefensible. And when you defend the indefensible, you resort to lies. And the lie of the IRA definition is that it's anti-Semitic to support Palestinian freedom and equality. And Jewish Voice for Peace, and I, as a proud member of Jewish Voice for Peace, thoroughly repudiate the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. There is nothing hateful. So those same family that welcomed me in their home as a Jew lived in a regime where Zionist soldiers can enter their home uninvited, unwelcome, at the barrel of a gun. That same family welcomes me, embraced me, fed me, but they don't want Zionists in their home. And they unwelcome Zionists, but that's not anti-Semitic. That's because they believe in their own freedom and equality as human beings, and it's because they are against colonialism. And we have to recognize that the Zionist movement resorts to the lie that there's anything anti-Semitic about rejecting the legitimacy of the Israeli state, that resorts to the lie that there's something anti-Semitic about opposing settler colonialism. Self-respecting Jews support Palestinian freedom. Self-respecting Jews know that the lesson of the Holocaust is never again to anyone. And people who seek safety through state domination do not understand that all of our safety, the only true path to our safety, is through solidarity and our collective liberation, living with equality and freedom for all, and living with genuine social justice for all. So Jewish Voice for Peace, our Jewish view, is that IRA is itself hate speech, it is trash, it should be rejected, and that we should reject anti-Semitism, but real anti-Semitism, and not sow the confusion that criticism of Israel, rejection of the legitimacy of the Israeli state, is in any way anti-Semitic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, do you want to sit at the table?
Can I, excuse, I want to add one more
Sure,
point.
yeah,
Sure.
yeah, you still have time.
The question of whether only Jews can have a voice in defining anti-Semitism. The problem is that the dishonest propaganda lie of the IRA definition doesn't only impact Jewish lives. It in fact stifles the Palestinian pursuit of human rights. If it's being used to stifle the Palestinian pursuit of human rights, of course Palestinians should have a say in this definition. So no, it is not, as a proud Jew, I have a voice in defining anti-Semitism, but so should Palestinians if the definition is being used to support their oppression. And saying that they shouldn't is a way to further stifle and oppress them. I'll give an analogy. I proudly say Black Lives Matter. We know that some people who are invested in white supremacism and white privilege tell us that they hear that as white lives don't matter. They hear it as anti-white racism. But we know that what they're really concerned with is to protect not white people, but white privilege and white supremacy. And this is exactly analogous. When you hear people say that they hear that Israel is an illegitimate settler colonial state, or that Zionism is a form of settler colonial oppression, when they say that's anti-Jewish, it's because they're invested in Jewish supremacism and Jewish privilege. And let me tell you, it is a desecration of.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I would love to hear.
So sorry, I'm in a public. It is a desecration of my Jewish faith. I will not remember the exact words, but one of the great teachings in Jewish theology is the oppressed call and God's ear hears them. And that is why, as a Jew, when I know that Palestinians are being denied freedom and equality by a supremacist state, a settler colonial state, a state engaged in the obscenity of genocide at this moment, I say to you that it's not a legitimate state, and I proudly stand with my Palestinian sisters and brothers and tell you that Zionism is a form of racism, Zionism is a form of hate, and The IRA definition is an attempt to shut down support for freedom and equality.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Abdul Qadar Sino. He's an associate professor of political science and Middle Eastern studies at Indiana University, Bloomington. He has a BA in Jewish studies, received his PhD in political science from UCLA in 2002, was the CISAC postdoctoral fellow at Stanford University in 2002-2003, a 2009 Carnegie Scholar, and a 2014-15 fellow at Woodrow Wilson Center. He is the author of books and articles on Afghanistan's conflicts, Muslim minority political representation in Western liberal democracies, public attitudes towards Muslim immigration, conflict processes, and Islamist parties' participation in elections.
Thank you, Kelly. First, I would like to say that the statement that was prepared that you're discussing right now is incredibly well written and very mature and intellectually advanced statement. It's very impressive the way it was written. And I applaud you for this. I applaud you for your standards of work and engagement here at CAPS. Now, there's two questions very briefly here, is that why is IRA written this way? What does it aim to accomplish? And second, I was asked by Kami and by Dajla to speak about how it affects Muslim Americans, but a little bit more nuanced in who gets affected by IRA's definition, etc. I speak about it nationally as well as locally. Now, let's start with IRA. It's a weird document. It's about anti-Semitism to some degree, but it's also a lot about Israel. And it privileges Israel. It elevates it to a level higher than other states in what is allowed to be said about it. Why does a document have that shape? Well, first of all, it was created for the purpose of being considered for international relations. It was adopted by the State Department of the United States and other countries' representatives. So the reason Israel is mentioned in it that way is because it's supposed to provide a guideline about how other states and international organizations should deal with Israel, as well as deal with acts of anti-Semitism within them, their borders and international what have you. So that explains the awkward, unusual wording of a document is supposed to deal with bias against one ethnic or ethno-religious group. But what happened later, of course, people are very creative, including activists and people who are partisan, and they figured out, you know what, this is a really good statement that we can use domestically in the United States to silence critique of the state of Israel, to limit free speech when it comes to criticism of the policies of the state of Israel. And since it has a cachet of being adopted already by the State Department, that should help us in our mission to make institutions such as universities, states, state legislation accept. And so they did. And you have, of course, this marriage of interest, this unholy alliance, I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't get too adventurous with my words here, between Christian nationalists and some Jewish pro-Israel groups, such as the ADL, AIPAC, etc., where they have commercial interests in accomplishing exactly that. And this is just one of the several things they have done together to try to limit free speech of Israel, and I mentioned a couple of examples. But that explains that awkward wording of a document that now is becoming more and more adopted, but that was not created for the purpose of being adopted for domestic use in the United States. And then that created a problem, because it clashes with basic constitutional protections. So, at the heart of the double standard clause of IRA, which is the one I will focus on, there's other things, of course, in it that are perfectly acceptable, as Professor Khazou mentioned when she compared it with the Jerusalem Declaration. But if you focus on the double standard clause, it basically says that if you want to criticize Israel, you have to abide by a series of criteria. And if you don't, then you are an anti-Semite. Okay. I don't know of any other country in the world which is protected by anything like that, that has been in states by governors like our own Governor Holcomb, who said this is unacceptable constitution, or other politicians' statements, etc. There's only Israel, nothing but Israel. Now, why would the advocates of this definition of anti-Semitism want to propagate it? Well, first, I mean, they have an interest in reducing critiques of Israel that may gain traction. And they may fear that they cannot win the arguments. There are reasonable arguments being made by Israelis as well as others that Israel is an apartheid state. Zionism is a sort of nationalism, is a type of nationalism that emerged in the context of the most virulent nationalisms in Europe from the 1880s on. And that hasn't evolved beyond that in some ways. There are forks of Zionism that emerged, liberal Zionism, or what have you. I'm not completely familiar, but in practice, we see Zionism as applied right now within the confined state of Israel as reflecting some of those values from Europe, from the 19th, from the heyday of nationalism in Europe. I don't want to specify a specific country or specific era, but it's different as an ethno-nationalism. So if you feel losing the arguments, you might as well undermine those who make them. And the accusation of anti-Semitism is potent. Those who use it to elevate the interest of the state of Israel understand that it's a potent accusation. And the problem with it too is that it's being cheapened, as Dr. Professor Siegel mentioned earlier in his talk, but that's a topic for another day and another speaker today. Now, there's also a deep irony and deep contradiction in Aya. Think about it for a second. It says you cannot treat Israel as a special case when you criticize it. You cannot criticize it uniquely without criticizing 10 other countries. I don't know what exact criteria and yardstick is there, at the same time, by having 10 mouths saying similar criticism at the same time. I don't know how that works exactly, But on the other hand, the same advocates of Israel, when they want to advocate for more aid for Israel or for a more American support, are more than willing to make the case that Israel is special and unique and incomparable and uniquely deserving of American backing. For example, this is where the kind of promises are made by Christian nationalists, other conservatives, the pro-Israel groups, and some of the older supporters of Israel from who are maybe otherwise in the middle of American politics, the middle ground of American politics, when they try to explain why Israel has received more US military aid than any other state since the 1970s on a regular basis, without any restrictions on the use of those weapons, unlike any other state as well, right? We're talking about $300 billion in today's dollars, when you adjust it to today's dollars. Why Israel is the only state that Christian nationalists elevate for theological reasons. I don't know if you saw, for example, the latest hearing in Congress with the Colombia president of Colombia, when this lovely congressperson asked her about, do you want to anger the God of the Bible by allowing criticism of Israel in Colombia, for God's sake? Okay, so it's, and we're talking again about the massive, very influential constituency in the United States, politically speaking, very influential, right? Israel is the only state that is protected from free speech in the United States and several European countries. In France, they have banned protests for Palestinian human rights in Gaza. In Germany, they banned the burning of Israel's flag. They didn't expand it to all foreign nations' flags for constitutional reasons. And here with Iowa, this is also limiting Americans' free speech on one foreign state to whom they have no obligation and no loyalty. And of course, Israel is the only state that's protected under the United Nations Security Council incessantly, with very rare exceptions, from resolutions that condemn it on its behavior, regarding its behavior in Gaza, as well as historically in many instances against Palestinians and other Arab populations. So if Israel can be privileged in speech that's favorable, why shouldn't it be treated as any other state in speech that's not favorable? I don't even need to make that argument, in fact, because the Constitution protects our right of speech. It says any state on its own, if you want to, any foreign state, including our own state, right? But I just thought it was delicious to point out the irony in the behavior of the advocates of the state of Israel, when double standards, they use it cynically when they are in favor of Israel, but reject it, for example, or define it in a certain way to try to define Israel against criticism. All right, now my assignment was to talk about how all this affects Muslim Americans as a minority, and I want to be nuanced because it's not just about Muslim Americans, which is about critics of Israel. But Muslim Americans are targeted for one reason that's really important, is that in the ethno-religious thinking of Christian nationalists and pro-Israel Zionists in the United States and in Israel, they understand the world along ethnic and religious lines. So in their mind, every Jew is inherently an ally, even though that's very much wrong. And every Muslim is inherently an enemy, even though that's also an oversimplification. In fact, we have some interesting numbers out there right now. For example, in the United States, you have just conducted a survey of Jewish and Muslim Americans, representative samples and all that, where they find that about a third about 35% of Jewish Americans believe that the way Israel conducted its operations in Gaza is absolutely not acceptable. And 70% of American Muslims do the same thing. And so when we talk in absolute terms, Jews and Muslims, it's ridiculous, in fact. And also by about 35% of the American public feel it's unacceptable or very unacceptable, the way Israel is behaving in Gaza. But in the minds of the ethno-religious people, the people whose thinking is based on ethno-religious considerations, they see the Muslim as an enemy. And that matters because that's reflected in policy. And so the imposition of IRA is not the only case where Muslim Americans are restricted because, as a consequence of that conflict taking place in the Middle East and the work of advocates for Israel, whether they're evangelical Christians or other supporters or AIPAC, there have been other examples. For example, Indiana and Texas and maybe 2,000 or so states have passed laws where anyone contracting with the state has to sign a paper document saying that they will never they are against boycotting Israel. Now, boycott is the First Amendment, is presented as a First Amendment right. I don't want to deal with that foreign country. I don't want to buy their stocks. That's a decision protected under the First Amendment. Okay, so there were famous cases in Texas, for example, a teacher, a special needs teacher, was a contractor in a school in Texas, therefore a Texas contractor. She was Palestinian, she refused to sign it. And they told her, sorry, we cannot renew your contract. You work for us for the least thinking that no, you cannot work here. And there have been many other cases since. And we also have that law in Indiana, by the way. And so you may also recall about a decade ago, anti-Sharia laws were passed. Well, the instigator of those laws is actually an Israeli American who lived in Israel. He was an Israeli Orthodox Jew, okay, a lawyer, an attorney. And he started a campaign to help the interests of the state of Israel. But what's the connection between Israel and anti-Sharia laws of the United States? First of all, let me clarify. There's no Sharia law in the United States. Okay, nowhere there ever be. We have American common law only, and there's no room for the foreign law to be applied along American common law. It's all its application for electoral reasons. Well, of course, the Christian right voted, and the politicians who do well with this fear in society of foreign other and something other loved it, and therefore it's a low cost thing they can do to pass an anti-Sharia law in a red state to make it wrong case. But why would that Israeli American want to promote that? I mean, there's deep irony here. If Sharia is forbidden, Islamic law, then also Jewish law, which he practices as a other conservative Jew, would be at risk, right? Well, the reason is because in his mind, Muslims are the enemy. And America is where the major battle for the Middle East is taking place. Because the United States is a backer of Israel, without whom Israel may not be able to survive on its own. And so to undermine the Muslim, therefore helps Israel in his logic. Is it logical? No. But in his mind, it is. And this is another example. And so you had 2 or 3 dozen United States that did pass anti-Sharia laws. Now, having anti-Sharia law means that all of Islam cannot be practiced, which infringes on religious rights, right? And so the idea was that to discourage Muslims from coming and living in the United States and being part of the American political life. How about in Bloomington? Well, at IU in particular, I mean, let's put it this way: it's hard to advocate for Palestinian rights, human rights. You may have heard that I had some problems with the administration. It's the Palestinian Solidarity Committee, which were a group of very intelligent, very engaged and engaging students, have been targeted by the administration. The advisor was targeted, even before this current administration, like the McRobbie one, for example, McRobbie boycotted the American Studies Association, which is a major academic association, because the American Studies Association boycotted the state of Israel, or Israeli universities. So he was one of 6 university presidents only. One of them was Harvard, so who boycotted the ASA. So just to show you that we have we have an administration at IU that is very sensitive to any criticism of Israel. It has a lot to do with the political environment in Indianapolis, as well as perhaps the influence of some influential donors who are very Zionist, highly Zionist, etc. All right, but even worse now. Remember when Jim Banks wrote a letter to IU criticizing it for not for being anti-Semitic or what have you? Soon after, there was a New York Times article about how ultra-conservative American Christian nationalists are using the anti-Semitism trope really to attack DEI at universities, as it means to attack DEI. They were just it was just a cynical tool. Not that they don't care about anti-Semitism in particular, it was a cynical tool. But what's interesting is that, even more interesting, is that President Putin of Indiana University wrote him a response that the IDS, our valiant journalists for the state at IU, were able to get that letter. And they published it. And in it, it's amazing. Pamela Whittle tells Jim Banks that among the many things she's doing is that IU is working very closely with 2 organizations that fight anti-Semitism, and she gives the name to those organizations. One of them is Israel Coalition on Campus. And those 2 organizations, their mission, in fact, is to promote Israeli interests. It's not fighting anti-Semitism. It's promote Israeli interests by clamping on speech in support of Palestinian human rights on American campuses. So our own university president is allied with pro-Israeli groups whose goal is to clamp on the speech of our own students who speak on Palestinian human rights. So yes, this conflict in general does affect the Muslim American minority, and also anyone who speaks on Palestinian human rights in our society and their freedom of speech. And IRA is being instrumentalized to frame such speech as being anti-Semitic. And that's why IRA is so dangerous. Because it provides a very, very low threshold to make any speech about Israel anti-Semitic, in the minds of those who don't like it or who advocate for the interests of the state of Israel. And, who's fighting IRA is a white coalition of people who care about justice, who care about challenging power. Because IRA is all about power remaining with those who have it. Oh, by the way, it's not an anti-Semitic troll, don't get me wrong. So, because that could be interpreted by IRA as being very anti-Semitic, and that basically is in support of the state of Israel, and its policies. Now, also, there's another thing too here, let's be careful about the words, because some of them can be, a bit misleading. Supporting Israel or criticizing Israel, it's actually not that, it's about criticizing Israeli policies. And this is an important distinction. We're not here discussing whether Israel should exist as a state, but whether its policies towards the Palestinians, for example, or towards the Arab minority in Israel, or towards whether its government's policy towards LGBTQ people in Israel, or towards democratic institutions, or etc. And vis-a-vis Jews of Arab descent, etc. All of those are policies. And they can be, when we criticize them, we're not putting in doubt the result that is to exist. Also, even if we did, there are ways to, when you see, for example, when you hear Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Okay, it's being interpreted by some people as being anti-Semitic because it's Palestine, free. Palestine does not contain Jews, so Jews will be expelled. So it is calling for Jewish genocide. Well, that's one way to see it. But there's another way to see it that no one talks about, which many other people chanted that they believe in. Meaning that the two people can live in one land. So maybe Israel as a Jewish state, and a state only for Jews, when even the Arab Israeli minority have, who live there have second class citizen status, could become a state for two people. And in that scenario, there's no genocide. In fact, I personally advocate that. Under IRA, when I advocate for one state for two people living side by side as co-equals, as citizens of the same state with similar rights under the law, under IRA, I'm an anti-Semite because I'm putting in doubt Israel's existence as in its current status or its current laws. But there's nothing anti-Semitic about criticizing institutions, which are themselves racist, because they elevate one group of people against over others. But under Ireland, that would be anti-Semitic. In fact, it's a litmus test. If it is anti-Semitic to call for equality under the law, regardless of race and religion, then that's dilutes that concept of anti-Semitism so much that it has no meaning whatsoever anymore. And that's why IRA is very dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now we will have questions from commissioners only. Do any commission members have questions for our guests who just spoke? No questions. Okay. All right, moving on to questions and public comment from the people here in person in our audience. Would you please raise your hand if you would like to make a question or a comment so we can decide how long everyone has to talk? Well, in that case, we can allow, Jason, you're chairing the meeting. Yeah, I don't think we need to.
And if you could, state your name and spell it for me so that I can get it right in the minutes.
Start with David.
My name is David Keppel, Keppel, and I'm spokesperson for Bloomington Peace Action Coalition. I'm speaking tonight in part because one of the drafters of the initial ceasefire resolution was BPAC. And I would like to try to talk about our motivations in BPAC for feeling that this resolution was necessary. Last night, the United States Senate passed $14 billion in so-called emergency military aid to the state of Israel. I feel compelled, not because of ethnic or religious background, but I feel compelled as an American citizen to be accountable for the actions of my government. It is my government which has been indispensable to the current military campaign the state of Israel has waged in Gaza. It is my government that has supplied heavy bombs that have destroyed the lives and homes of civilians. It is my government that on 3 occasions exercised a veto in the United Nations Security Council. Recently, New York Times columnist Michelle Goldberg said that although the actions of the anti-war movement have been imperfect, that she was painfully reminded of the 1950s campaign of Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, accusing Americans, dissident Americans, of being pro-communist. I think that that is what is at stake here. What is at stake here is our free speech rights as American citizens to take responsibility for the actions of our own government. And I think that as you have heard in 3 highly articulate criticisms of the IRA definition and the way it has been wielded, those are attacks not just on Palestinian Americans, and they're certainly not the responsibility of Jewish Americans, because you have heard a very eloquent advocate of Jewish Voice for Peace tonight. But they are attacks upon our rights as American citizens, our rights and our responsibilities as American citizens. And I cannot accept what my country is doing in Gaza. And I commend the Commission for its vigorous and articulate response to the charge made by one individual against the Commission. And I encourage the Commission to defend the rights of free speech with respect for all and with compassion for people of different views in the city of Bloomington. Thank you.
Here. My name is Tamayatullah Sharani. I know that's hard to spell, but it's 12 letters. I'll go ahead. HEMAYATULLAH, and that's just the first name. And then SHAHRANI.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank CAPS for everything you guys are doing. I know I had the pleasure of coming in to discuss a call for a ceasefire, and me having spoken, I know the intent of calling for a ceasefire was for humanitarian purposes and to bring an end to an unjustified killing of mass numbers of people, women and children, who by default children are always going to be innocent. And so I know that is what motivates a lot of people. So I myself found it very appalling that an individual was using the IGR definition
to try to accuse CAPS of anti-Semitism. And in fact, I find it quite, I don't like to use the word hypocritical because it's a very strong term, but maybe euphemistically ironic that when people are trying to call an end to ethnic cleansing or genocide of races, that they're saying, calling for an end to that, calling for a ceasefire against attacks against another ethnicity is racism. It's like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? Which one is racism? Continuing the attacks against these people because of their race, killing entire civilizations, societies, women, children, hospitals, residences, the complete decimation of society, that is racism, you know? And calling an end to that is actually against racism. And yet to kind of flip that around, reality upside down, and say, no, you're calling for that is not because you're not advocating or allowing us to continue this. I find that very, very appalling and sinister from my perspective. It really lacks substance, and I find it abhorrent, to be frank. So I applaud you guys for your courage in sticking to the principles, which is very substantive. But also with respect to the presentations that were made here, I really appreciated all three of them. And perhaps this is a comment in terms of what was said, perhaps a question, but more of a comment. Because I think what was mentioned or alluded to was the fact that, you know, Jews may discuss criticism of Israel or Palestinians because they're in that situation. Well, I think that's kind of very limiting. And I think we need to be more open about it, because even when, I think when people are dealing with content that is being spoken, it's very clear to identify when someone is clearly anti-Semitic. And some of those were mentioned on there during the professor's presentation. But I think when we start dealing with context, it can get a little tricky, and we need to be extremely careful. Because just because Palestinians are the ones being oppressed, their lives are the ones being made horrific, unbearable. Children being killed, it's just maimed, and just the immense suffering and pain, and even the parents having to deal with that. I mean, the mothers who have to poison their children with this polluted water, knowing it's killing them. I can't imagine how horrific that is psychologically. But even for others, because I'm not Arab and I'm not Jewish, and I care about what's going on there. And people may ask, well, what is your interest? Well, I'm a human being. I care about human rights. It was mentioned by Mr. Keppel, you know, our taxpayer dollars are the ones funding this, but also our government here has been providing the diplomatic cover for this. And not only that, but this occupation has been going on more than my entire life. More than my entire life. I'm not as young as some of the people in this room. But if it's longer than my life, there's something seriously wrong. And not only that, but also from a religious standpoint, you know, that area is very sacred for the Abrahamic faith, as people like to call it. I don't like that term, but you know, the monotheistic faiths, as most people like to call them. And they comprise a large, perhaps more than half the world's population. And if an area is considered sacred, you know, you don't commit acts that are very horrific. For example, for Muslims in Mecca, or a sacred place, you're not allowed to kill people. You don't kill insects. You go on a pilgrimage, you don't even cut down trees. You don't fight. You're on your best behavior. Your prayers are counted many, many fold more, but at the same time, your bad deeds are also counted much more seriously. So, and when people see this area as a very sacred place historically, religiously, it has relevance to people. So what I don't like is the fact that it would limit who can criticize, who can discuss, because again, it needs to be the substance. There can be all kinds of reasons why it's relevant to people. And so that I think where I have a little bit of an issue is when well, IRA is clearly flat out problematic, as I kind of mentioned, and as it was alluded to. They're doing exactly the thing that they're saying it shouldn't be, is conflating the two things. But also, I think with respect to even the other definition, the Jerusalem one, I think we need to be careful and not just limit it to Palestinians and Jews. I think it needs to be open to everyone and more focused on the content. Because, and people can provide the context, because it can have context for many very, very different reasons and apply to many people. Some people are just human rights activists. They care about things, or they might have friends, or they might have all kinds of different reasons. So I just wanted to add that as a comment the presentation that was made, because it is more nuanced than that, and I think it is, as, the professor mentioned, an oversimplification to try to generalize and say, okay, this must be this. And I don't like these assumptions. When people make assumptions, that's where the problems happen, and I think, especially with the Iowa one, but even with the Jerusalem one, there are places where assumptions can incorrectly lead to these accusations, and I think those need to be refined from my perspective. I don't know if you guys really agree with that, but that's my little bit of a question at the end there. So thank you very much. And again, I applaud all of you, and I thank CAPS for this. And I know you guys are working to combat racism, and I think by calling for a ceasefire, opening up humanitarian aid, you are in fact combating racism. So I find it appalling that anyone would say that that is racism. So thank you for that, for your courage and your persistence. Resilience is the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask a follow-up question of Professor Kazum. So I know, where you sort of ended, it was fairly gray, saying, well, the IRA would say that this speech itself is anti-Semitic. Yet both definitions seem to agree that context behind any speech matters. And so, you mentioned a couple, I guess, justifiable non-anti-Semitic reasons for making such speech might be, you mentioned they might be Palestinian people, or they might have, they might view Israel, they might focusing on Israel for legal reasons. Or I just was wondering if you could talk more about that, and very specifically about what those two definitions would have in common about what would be acceptable reasons to make such critical speech of Israel's policies. And it may be specifically on the reasons that have been given here today for why our community put forward that resolution, the actual intentions that people have given.
In my self-imposed role as the spokesperson of both Ira and Jerusalem, the answer would be that Jerusalem isn't clear, right? Jerusalem specifically says Palestinians can criticize Israel, and you're right, Israeli policies rather than Israel. And as an aside, the whole idea of criticizing Israel is complicated because it implies that there's one Israel, but Israeli Jews themselves fit the whole spectrum on the conflict, right? They vote everywhere, so it's not clear which Israel is being criticized. Netanyahu is not extremely popular right now, and he's never actually been, well, he was once very popular, but recently he hasn't been very popular. Yeah, so Jerusalem specifically mentions that Palestinians have many non-anti-Semitic reasons for criticizing Israel. The question is, how far do you extend that boundary? Arguing that my money is being used to bomb Gazans right now would fit Jerusalem in the sense that it would be a non-anti-Semitic reason, right? What if we're in Jerusalem's head, right, which is what my task is today, how far would we extend into the Arab world or into the Muslim world or into the general Middle East region past Palestinians, right? Jerusalem would give us some sense that anyone who's being affected by Israeli policy would have clear non-anti-Semitic reasons for criticizing. Looks like you wanna.
Sorry, just to build a bit on Ramatullah's point earlier that, well, I mean, when we criticize China for how it treated the Uyghurs 2 years ago.
Right.
The only question that people who are neither Chinese nor Uyghur are expressing their disdain and unhappiness with that. Of course not. There's a lot in international law that permits people who are not affected directly to play a role. For example, there's a duty to protect that is now being used international law to say one country can actually go intervene in a different country to protect minorities subject to genocide if they want to. You know, there is a document in international law that has legal basis. You don't have to be connected to a conflict to be allowed to talk about it. And you don't have to have the burden of explaining your type of conflict to take a moral stand. It's only in those definitions that this exists, even in the Jerusalem one, right? Which I look very favorably upon, don't get me wrong, but this one is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Because there's some presumptiveness jumping to the conclusion, even in the Jerusalem one, and that's what my point was, is presuming that in a blanket way is very, very dangerous.
Presuming what, sorry?
Presuming that there's anti-Semitism if you don't fit into this category or that category.
So the presumption of.
If you're not Palestinian,
The presumption
then
of
the
guilt.
presumption is yes, exactly. It presumes guilt, that it must be hidden. And that's where I think the danger is when people go down within context without looking at the content or even asking for the context. There's very dangerous ground there. Would you agree?
For sure, I would say that Palestinians are being presumed innocent. I don't know that others are being presumed guilty. I'm not sure.
Well, we saw that with CAPS. That's why, that's why it just seemed that way to me, like when I see it factually.
What people do is different from what these documents are doing. I think that Jerusalem and Ira and many, many Jews believe that there is a dynamic in the world in which anti-Semites are using Israel as cover. And I think that it therefore becomes very important to create a list of conditions under which we know that that is or is not happening. So hopefully that's a way of addressing your concern that some people are guilty until proven innocent. Maybe not precisely, but Jews are certainly concerned that this is going on, right? That people are using Israel as a cover for anti-Semitism.
But isn't that conflating Israel with Jews? Which is really anti-Semitism according to both definitions?
The argument of Ira and Jerusalem and many Jews would be that they are not the ones who are conflating Israel and Jews, but that there are people who dislike Jews who would like to say that it's not politically correct, and critiquing Israel would be for them a way of critiquing Jews, right? They're saying Israel, but they mean Jews. The assertion is that that is a thing that exists, and it should be sought out and stopped as much as any other kind of oppression or inequality or abuse should be sought out and stopped. Right, I think your comment is extremely important, right? We also don't want to presume that people are guilty. But I think that the Ira Jerusalem comeback would be, this is a real thing. We're not making it up. There's a reason to question whether it's there or not.
There's a lot of fine tuning that needs to happen then.
There's a lot of, right, we always,
People from being blanket dumped into this, and
That's what we're trying to do.
we
here
always need to
today,
question,
some of
yeah.
that.
I hate to be this person, there's another meeting that starts in here right at 6:30, which is why you might hear people outside. So I might recommend you all call the question on your statement if you would like to do that, and then, let the other.
But I have so much
get
more
set
to
up.
say. We'll have to talk after.
Maybe you can find out.
Yeah, great, thank you, and thank you, yeah. So without further ado, I'd like to make a motion, to vote on the statement, on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism.
I can second that motion.
Okay. So,
Do you want?
roll.
It's the roll call vote. Jenna?
Sorry, before we do this, can you restate that and kind of
Yeah.
clarify
I'd like
that?
to make a motion that the commission pass the statement on the IRA definition of anti-Semitism.
Thank you. I appreciate that. No,
Thanks, yes, it wasn't clear, you're right.
Roll call vote, Jenna?
Yes.
Doc,
Yes.
Tyler? Yeah. Angel?
Yes.
I vote yes. Tammy?
You're muted.
Yes,
Passes unanimously.
Hey, yeah, I just wanted to, make one more short comment before we all run out of here. And that's through my service on this commission, I have learned that communities are made safer when citizens come together to protect the safety of the least safe people among us. This is the specific task of our commission. This is what happened when the local residents of Bloomington, who are aware of the horrific crime of genocide, among many other crimes that are taking place in Gaza, and of our community's very tangible connections to those events, assembled together to ask our city to take the first step necessary to end the genocide, which is a ceasefire. In working with this group, I have been inspired by the bravery and camaraderie of these residents, many of whom have experienced enormous personal loss during their lives from the crimes against humanity committed during the Holocaust in Europe, or who have suffered from the crimes against humanity that have been committed in more recent times. Those residents of diverse faiths, ethnicities, social status, and political persuasion all stopped and they felt ethically obligated to act. And they took civic action to help save the lives of people they have never met. I'm proud to live in a city with such people. And I thank the community members who are with us today for your commitment to peace, safety, and justice in Bloomington and elsewhere.
Before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you to everybody that spoke today, the professionals that gave that very educated information and shared that as well as the community members. We can tell that this means a lot to every single one of you, and I appreciate you coming out and sharing with us today.
We want to express our thanks as well.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right, you're adjourned.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.